All right, why don't we call the meeting to order? Steve is gonna run the deck for us, right? I'm sorry, yes, Anthony, sorry, I know, I said forgive me.
You didn't make 5 minutes.
Sorry, I know, that's why I said, I'm gonna ask for forgiveness now. Anthony, can you pull up, and by the way, actually, we should introduce you. Have you met everybody in the room, Anthony? You've met the finance committee, most of us. Have you met the key players in town?
Yes.
You guys have talked, have you met Lori and Alexa? They're
School
behind.
committee chairs are here.
Yep,
Alexa and Tracy.
and behind you. And in the back, we have Lynn from Carlisle Finance. Yep, since we share a regional budget, we've got them here as well. So thank you guys for coming, appreciate that. And we have our guideline voice, oh no, we don't, that's not a member of the school committee, okay. So let's call up the agenda since I don't have it in front of me. So we've called the meeting to order. Would anyone like to make? Oh, wait a minute, we've got to take a roll call, Dee, because I realize we're remote. You want to do the roll call?
Roll call.
Yeah.
Dee Ortner, present. Peggy Briggs,
Present.
Eric Dahlberg,
Present.
Parashar Patel,
Present.
John Kukla,
Present.
John Garofalo,
Here.
Christine Reynolds. Here. Carlin Reed,
Present online.
Lois Wassoff.
Present.
Is there anyone else from the finance committee that I've missed?
Quasi.
It's Kazi Sidruzaman. I'm present online.
I'm sorry, Amrit Kumar.
He's missing. He's not coming
Okay,
today.
Suresh.
He's not coming either.
Okay. Lindsay List.
Yep.
Okay. Kathy Kupalo. Okay, and Chris Reynolds, I think that's it.
Okay, we have a.
Quasi?
Yep.
Yes, I'm here.
Quasi's here, okay.
Good, we've got a quorum. Any members of the public wish to make any comments before we get started? I don't hear any. Okay. We are gonna skip the update on follow-up items, mostly because I have not had a chance to update those. Let's do the committee liaison update. Eric, I think you went to the chair. Oh, you gave the chairs breakfast last time,
Yes.
sorry.
Yeah, no new news.
Any updates from committee liaisons? I'm looking around, I don't see, oh, go ahead, Don.
Oh, just that, from regarding the Minuteman Tech School, they have formed a search committee for a new superintendent, and they have repurposed a committee to study sort of capacity and to answer that question of whether or not more students could be accommodated, or what's the impact of additional students. Thanks.
Who's running the school now?
Interim superintendent, and
Existing
that
employee
a prior employee who had retired came back on a temporary basis, and I'm not sure if that's going to continue or not. There is a contract negotiation now for the interim.
Okay, thank you, Don, appreciate that. We have Anthony or Carrie on the fiscal year 24 and 25 revenue numbers. So I've asked them to come up and just give a rough general sense, because we are far from having final or close to final numbers for 24 or 25, but just some sense to set the stage a little bit as to the funds that may or may not be available for fiscal year 25.
This is revenue projection.
This is revenue projection / estimate, very rough, right?
This is
Some complications this year. Go ahead.
revenue conversation.
A revenue.
Revenue conversation. So we do not have spreadsheets to show you like we usually do. We did just hear today that our new growth was certified for fiscal 24, was certified at $1,028,031. So a little bit higher than what we had expected, but about $200,000 lower than the prior year. I think in fiscal 23, we saw that there was a little, when everybody was home during the pandemic, they renovated their homes, and we definitely saw an increase in building permits and new growth finally trickling through. We did have some positive results in other local receipts in fiscal 23. We are seeing a rebound of our local excise taxes, the meals tax and the room occupancy. Also seeing a pretty big increase in the jet fuel excise. So because we are adjacent to Hanscom, we receive, the 4 communities that surround Hanscom receive a percent of the excise tax generated from fuel sales at Hanscom. So we have seen an increase there and expect that probably will continue. There's a, we're all talking about the level of activity over there now. We also have a significant increase in investment income, both because interest rates have gone up, but we also have bond proceeds from the middle school project that we have borrowed, and we have a cash flow associated with that project. We borrow for a year at a time, and so we have a lot of those funds available. And what we would recommend is that for fiscal 23, they will fall to free cash, and that we scoop up 1.5 million of that to put into the middle school stabilization fund. And that would bring the middle school stabilization fund at the $5 million mark.
Carrie, what's the rule on arbitrage? So we don't run afoul of that here?
You can't make more than, is it the coupon rate or the interest rate? You can't make more investing.
Okay.
Yeah. So we will keep track
Okay.
of that.
So there was 1.5 that will go into the stabilization fund?
Yeah. That would be that's the rough recommendation
estimate, okay.
at this point, just
Okay.
so that we're not looking anywhere else for that remaining 1.5.
And so that will be factored into the fiscal year 25 budget and town meeting warrant, is that
that
right?
would have to be appropriated in fiscal 25.
Okay,
Will be a warrant article.
yeah, that's what I just want to make sure we've
Yeah.
got timelines straight.
Right.
Yeah.
So it'll flow into free cash and then come out.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in total, we took in about it was 1.7 or 1.9 in investment income. So we're scooping up more than what we earned on the middle school, but we might as well do that.
We should build more middle schools.
So I did mention building permit receipts are higher, and if you're following what's going on, we have a couple of very large projects that are under review and under consideration, and we don't know the timing yet, so we're not planning for any of that in fiscal 25 yet. But there is a possibility that there may be some fairly large building permit receipts in fiscal 25. So because of the positive activity in fiscal 23 and new growth that was a little bit higher in fiscal 24, we are expecting that we will have an unused levy capacity in fiscal 24 of 4.54%. And I think when the budgets were originally produced, we were somewhere in the 3% range. So that's a $4.82 million. So that's good, much better than what we thought. So looking into fiscal 25, we actually, it's really too early for us, and it's always too early for us at this point in time to be projecting much more than a 2 or 2.5% increase in any of the receipts. And so when you talk about preliminary guideline, for sure, you're typically talking about increase to property tax, because it's too soon. We won't see the governor's budget until January. A lot of our local receipts are more third and fourth quarter receipts. And so we're really talking about the 2.5% increase that's allowed under property taxes. At the last meeting, we talked a little bit about the 5-year forecast and the fixed expense, the insurances, debt services, et cetera. And those are actually looking very positive for fiscal 25. And the reason is we're hoping to make some pretty big changes in health insurance. And we have started that process. Superintendent Hunter and I have started that process with our internal employee insurance committee. And we're actually hoping that it might be a flat budget on health insurance. And so we'll know more in the next several weeks. We did just on Monday receive a quote from Maya, which is a very large municipal insurance collaborative. We already purchased some of our property liability insurance through them. We've received a quote from them on health insurance. It looks really favorable, but it just came in on Monday. So we haven't analyzed that yet. So in terms of, what's left for fiscal 24, it looks like if you assume the 2.5% increase and a 2 to 2.5% increase for local receipts and state aid, that the dollar increase is about $2,457,000. That's about 2.44%, a little bit lower than the 2.5%, because there is some draw, even though the fixed expense looks good, there is some draw on that. So that's where we are right now.
So 2.457 increase. So what would that bring the number to? The total revenue number?
What all revenues?
Yeah, so you said 2.44% increase. So if I do the math, which I don't have a calculator, but what would that roughly be? It's like almost $100 million, right? Close to it.
The total budget projected right now is 137 million.
So, but on the revenue side, what is the 2.457 dollar increase? What was the base that you're adding it to? And so what's the total?
So they net to zero. So if you have $137 million budget, you got revenue and expenses that match, right?
Yeah,
Is that-
so
No,
the
this is for
2
5 is what
yeah.
she's saying, not 24.
the 2,457,000,
Yep.
that is the guidelines portion
From 24 or 20?
from 24. So that's
Okay.
100,786,000 is the
Right.
base. for
But
that.
you said for fiscal year 25 revenue, I thought is what you said.
The 2.4 million number is an increase over fiscal 24.
Okay. Over fiscal 24 revenue.
Yes.
And what is fiscal year 24 revenue? So 100? I'm sorry, I'm slow. I haven't had coffee.
That is the 2.4 would be the increase to guideline. So, and that is on the guidelines base of 100,786,000.
Yeah, so it's what's falling to the bottom. So when she's calculating revenue, she's just adding what's the incremental, and then she subtracts
I
off
see.
what's the growth in fixed costs, which you're
Oh,
projecting.
you're
is flat.
subtracting all of
Yeah,
that. So
so
in
it's just
essence,
sort of
you're
What's
assuming,
more available.
you're
for
assuming that
guidance.
without.
Yeah.
So, okay, so 2.44%
More available for
is
guidance.
available for guideline
Right?
spending.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay.
So I would note that included in the revenue estimates is $1 million from free cash to reduce property tax,
Yeah,
like
okay.
we always include. But there is no estimate of any carry forward on the town side because we're trying to get away from that practice.
Yeah. And then the property tax residential exemption, how does that play into this?
So one of the unknowns is the impact on the residential exemption to the overlay account. So the residential exemption, the select board voted to implement the residential exemption, but the official vote to actually implement or to actually impose it is is part of the tax classification hearing, which is scheduled for November 20th. So in order to get the best understanding of what the impact is, we have been publicizing this and asking people to submit applications. And at this point, what did you say? We have 2,100 applications as of Monday on about 6,000 parcels. The application deadline date is not until February 1st. We set the tax rate in November, again, November 20th. So we have to estimate, to the extent that we don't have 6,000 applications, and we have to make estimates of who we think will qualify and what the impact will be. And to the extent that we are off the mark, it hits the overlay account. And this really is just a big issue, big concern in the first year. Going forward, we have a much better idea of who's going to apply, and it doesn't matter so much if they apply early or right at the deadline. But the first year, it's difficult. So we typically set aside $500,000 in the overlay, and that's to cover all exemptions and abatements. So this year, we need to plan for something more, but we don't know what that something more is. We do have an overlay reserve account that has a balance, I believe, of close to $2.5 million. And that's where we've been pulling money out of to fund the middle school stabilization fund. So while I don't know for sure, I would hope between the $500,000 that we budget in 25 and what we have in reserve is going to more than cover any inaccuracy in the estimate. But we have not completed that calculation. And if you tune into or have tuned into any of the Board of Assessors meetings, there has been a lot of discussion about the need, and they felt that we should be setting aside significant amounts of money, as much as $4 million. I think that's probably excessive. And we've had a good response.
Yeah. What would cause it to impact the overlay account? Because it's really an allocation issue, right? It's between taxpayers. It doesn't change the overall levy, right?
Yeah.
So what would cause it to impact
Yeah.
the?
So I think this is something that we could give you something in writing. I wasn't expecting to talk about it, and I don't want to misspeak because everybody is tuned in to this issue.
All right.
Quick question, Carrie. When you said 6,000, so we've got 2.1 million applications in 2,100 applications in versus 6,000 eligible. Has that been corrected for trusts and rentals and whatnot?
So
From non-owner occupied or?
again,
You don't know,
I would
that's a fine
say
answer.
we have been using the 6,000 parcel number as the rough amount of parcels that we would assume would be eligible to apply. And remember, anybody should apply. Everybody should apply because there is a benefit to everybody. There's just more of a benefit to certain parcels based on assessed value.
Quasi, you have a question?
Yes, so I think the way I understood it is if you have a, over the average, which is like 1.2 million or so, if you have a multi-million-dollar house, then you're not benefiting from this tax exemption. Am I wrong?
You are benefiting, but I think if the committee is interested in a detailed discussion about how the residential exemption works, I think we should work to schedule something with the assessors versus run the risk of misspeaking about it at this meeting.
Yeah, no, actually, yeah, I think that would be very, very helpful, or at least get an idea as to what the estimate is, even if all 6,000, applicants apply, would, what are we looking at? $1 million, 500,000? It would be nice to have some idea.
Yeah, so given, I mean, we had a couple of conversations, Quasi, on this, and you may or may not have been at the meeting. And rather than have the assessors during this busy time come in and talk to us, Quasi, what I would urge is if there's probably I think there's a fact sheet we can circulate, Quasi, to help you understand how the assessment works. And in essence, why it will benefit all taxpayers. And I could talk to you offline about that, and hopefully that's enough. And then, the details on the overlay and stuff, we can kind of address if we have to, once we're past the November discussion, because we're afraid it's not really our responsibility.
Yeah. No, I for sure. I was at the Vitality meeting, and they're also not sure how this is working and how this is going to impact the overall budget.
Yeah, I guess that's the one question, Peggy. I'll get to you. So
Yeah.
if in fact there's an underestimate of the number of folks coming in, does that affect the 2.4 or does it not? That's the question, really. Or will we know?
The 2.4 that we're
or
currently
million guideline-
projecting
the
is being
guideline.
available.
So yes,
It would affect it if the finance committee chooses to recommend that it be funded within the guideline, which
okay,
I would think that would be unlikely,
okay,
given that we don't fund adjustments to the overlay in the guideline.
okay. So Quasi, that's the answer to the question. And then Peggy.
Just really quickly on schedule. So you have 2,100 applicants out of 6,000. The final deadline, did you say, was February 1st?
It is, it's the same deadline as for any abatement or exemption.
And that's also the due date for the next tax payment, if I'm not correct. Is it November 1st, February 1st? So everyone will get that notice in their tax bill again. And they'll look at it and hopefully get it done by the time they pay their next tax bill.
Well, you have to apply by the deadline in order to be eligible.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on 24 and 25 revenue? All right. Thank you very much. Now we
Parshar, I've
go
got
to-
Parshar, I've
Oh.
got a question for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see the hand raised. Go ahead,
No,
Colin.
I wasn't quite fast enough. Carrie, I'm just looking at some of the data sheets that you sent us, and I'm curious about the ambulance, the advanced life support services. It looks like the ambulance wants to get into this business, and it says that the ambulance is going to start offering it themselves. Questions I have about what would be the revenue and expense impact on the town budget, and how do you know there's a demand for these services in Concord? Now, this is for the ambulance advanced life support service that currently it sounds like it's farmed out, but you want to take it in-house. How do you know it's going to make money?
So Carlin, can we just hold that question until we get to the town response? And it may be something that we just have to get an answer back later. Because this item was about overall revenue projections, not to dive into all the local receipts and all. So we'll hold that question when we get to the town response.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Bob and Lori, you guys are up. Alexa, Tracy, did you guys want to do a preamble? All right. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. I'll let you guys worry about the implications of that.
As long as they don't talk. All right, yeah, thanks.
All right. Thank you guys for coming. We delayed this a week, so hopefully that gave you a little bit more time. So we're ready to hear, and then this will be our preliminary sort of conversation. We'll have another one November 16th, I think, as well. So you'll get some, I think you'll hear some preliminary thoughts and questions here. So take it away.
Yeah, and
I'll open it up and then Bob will take it from there. So just so you know where we are in our budget building process, we are in the thick of it, actually. So we've been working with the department heads, principals, other administrators to really work through what our needs are going to be, and then to also look through what we might be able to swap out, start to aggregate salaries. I think the biggest note to make, and you're going to hear this throughout the evening, it's a bargaining year for the teachers associations at both districts. So that leaves us a lot of unknown there. And our timeline has modified a little bit. We're on track to have a lot of this done by the later part of November. We're now scheduled to present the superintendent's recommended budget to the school committee December 5th. So I know your work is going to predate that a bit. So we'll be back in November to tell you where we're at and try to update information as we have it. Bob's put together a response to the memo requests, which we went through with the school committee the other night and thought we'd highlight for you and make this a dialogue, hopefully. And then we've done our best. And I think another, caveat here, we brought you 5-year projections, which in a school and educational environment is very, very hard, if not impossible. So these are our best estimates with a lot of assumptions baked in that may or may not be accurate in October of 2023. I'm not even sure I can hold to the 25 one at this point because we're trying to figure out that as we speak. So, and there's a lot of moving pieces, as always, with a few noteworthy ones this year. So I'm going to turn it to Bob, and we're happy to take questions kind of as we go through different topics. I think would be great.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening. So we have, I thought it'd be good first to start with the information request, the annual budget data request. You asked for a lot of information. I don't think we really went through it last year. It's kind of just assumed it's read, but I think it would be good to kind of walk through that, give some context before we dive into numbers. And this is probably not new, but to most of you, but we do, our budget process is a zero-based process. We work with administrators, department heads, and staff throughout the district central office to build our budgets. We do not just take an item from the prior year and carry it over to the next year. We look at positions, what our needs are, look at enrollments in kindergarten, look at enrollments in other places, our instructional materials, our contract services. So there's a thorough process. We actually sit and review line by line by line. It's an extensive process. So what we do ultimately at the end of this is we have kind of a request from the different schools and administrators. We will review it, and ultimately Lori will make a decision on what we're going to present in the superintendent's recommended budget. So we do that based on what we think our needs are, and that's our first pass at the budget. And there are, certainly not everything gets funded. As a reference, I don't know how many, I know some town officials participated in the strategic planning process. Matt Johnson, I think, did. I don't remember who else was on it. I've included a link to the plan in our memo, just highlighted some of the key initiatives. So this process was completed over the past several months into the end of FY23.
Yeah, this is brand new.
So those will be driving, as we look at, if we look at requests that we receive, those will, are they linked to our strategic plan or not? That's an important factor in whether we look at funding something. I've included references to our year-end budget status for each district. I know you've heard this already as I walked through them. I don't know if it's helpful or not to dive into it. I think that I'll skip past that so you have it. I've really presented the information at a very high level. I will say we obviously stayed within our budget. There were some drivers. There were some things that, for example, there was a curriculum purchase that we in one school made at the end of a certain fiscal year that freed up some funds this year that helped us offset overages in other areas. Things like that happen. But again, the details there, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
I actually have a couple of questions
Sure.
on this is the closeout of 23. That's what you're talking about?
Yep.
Yeah. So on some of it I knew you had talked about before. So we had to move about 400,000. This is on the high
CCRSD,
school,
yep.
right? In prepaid IT to fixed assets to cover the gap in the ring road paving, right? So there was that. The rest of the overruns looked like they were covered by circuit breaker. Is that sort of what happened? You sort of close it out through circuit breaker? Is that a way to think about it?
And you're looking specifically at the region.
I'm looking at the region, yeah.
So we were able to leverage circuit breaker to offset. And so we didn't have a full circuit breaker carryover this year.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Yeah.
So what happens to circuit breaker? So we're less than 1 year?
We're less than 1 year, but
Yeah.
our full year would have been 1.27 million.
Okay,
And so we're at somewhere above a million and below 1.1 million.
okay,
Off the top of my head, I don't remember it, but we'll actually see it somewhere else, I think, later.
okay. So you're about 200 grand short of the year, but
Yeah.
not terrible.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the circuit breaker has trended up a bit.
Yep. There was about $100,000 in transportation for homeless. Do you expect to recoup that?
Yes, we
Okay.
we've received some reimbursement in the first quarter.
Okay, so it'll hit in 24?
The-
I'm sorry, yeah,
It's coming in November.
Actually, there's different pieces. I'm sorry, I'm confusing the homeless grant and the homeless transportation.
yeah, transportation is what I'm
So the
talking about.
transportation will come, what we've worked at, we're a pilot district. And Lori's been talking to state officials, and they are aware that there's a timing issue. And we talked about this last year where
Yeah.
we have the expenses this year. We have just a
Right.
quarter
Yeah,
in
yeah.
FY 24, but we have a full, 300,000+ we expect in FY 25.
Okay,
What they are piloting is some other mechanism to fund it during the year.
okay,
And we are hopeful and waiting for specific guidance on how it'll work, but the general idea of the pilot is to not have the timing issue be a problem.
okay, good. So,
The advocacy was very effective. So
Good.
We're excited.
good. So we had it in 23, but it gets fixed in 24, and we're hoping they change the
permanent-
way
we hope
going
it's a permanent
forward.
fix.
Fix meaning you recoup it, I guess, the first 100.
We'll recoup it sooner than we thought, which
Yeah.
is gonna matter.
Okay, all right. And is there an E&D discussion? I didn't see it in the materials at all anywhere.
I can talk about that. I mean, I project we're going to be right around 5%, so we were at 4.6%.
Okay, so you'll be at the cap.
We'll be right around the cap.
Okay,
Um,
okay,
And I'll talk about basically the main driver of that was the interest rates. We had relatively conservative interest income budget, and the rates just kept going up. And
Okay.
so that's about 300,000.
okay. And in CPS, sort of same thing. It looks like whatever underspending on this side, there was more underspending in CPS than you would expected, and that was given to circuit breakers. It looks like it flows into it. Is
It's a
that
little bit of
different?
this is like a compliance issue. So it's not, so we have, there's rules about spending state and local funds
Yep.
on special ed.
Yep.
It's called maintenance of effort.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So we actually have a carryover in the grant instead of circuit breaker because we needed to
Oh.
spend circuit breaker plus general funds needed to hit a certain
Okay.
target.
Okay,
So we have an additional 200,000 in grant funds that we would not normally carry
Okay.
over.
so it's the same concept. It's just in a
Yes.
different line item.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay, I got that. And that's it. That's it for me on that. Thank you.
I have a question,
Yeah, go on.
non-money question. And I'm curious to know, with your strategic planning process, who are the people involved in that?
So through most of last school year, we ran a 40 to 50 member committee that met 4 times and talked through brainstorming on where we were, where we wanted to go, aggregating data that we gathered from surveys, from focus groups across students, parents, community, as wide net of a possible set of input that we possibly could. So it was that strategic planning committee that met, that as they aggregated data and looked at themes, reviewed where we had made progress and where we wanted to go, then they set the outcomes for the coming 5 years. And the school committee supported them last spring.
So was this, are all of the members faculty members or
No,
teachers? or-
Purposefully not just faculty,
Okay,
administration, teachers, students, parents, community members, some town leadership. as eclectic as we could make it, so it represented multiple perspectives.
And is anyone from the school committee
Yes,
involved in
there were
this?
2 school committee members actually at the strategic planning table, and then the entire community heard the outcome of the plan and talked through it and supported it.
Okay, so you develop the plan and then everything, all the money flows from the plan, all the decisions flow from.
That is the
plan.
goal, absolutely.
All right, thanks.
FY 24, it's early. I've shared information that we shared with the school committee, but we're within budget and there's not a lot to report one school month into the year. So we were asked to provide an update on ARPA ESSER funds. I've kind of highlighted up here where we are, and we're essentially at the region. We've spent down ESSER 2, ESSER 3, we anticipate spending all of it in FY 24. ARPA IDA has to be spent down. It's actually spent down now. It had an expiration of September 30, 2023, excuse me. ESSER 3 does expire September 30, 2024. So if there is some opportunity to carry over a little, we may do so at CPS. I think it's at the region. We don't anticipate having any to spend over. Part of the balance being a little bit more than the FY 23 expenses, is we did actually hire some positions that are ESSER funded at a little bit less than we had planned for. And we also have some summer school expenses from FY 25 that we may be able to offset for CPS if we're able to carry some funds over.
So Bob, how many positions were funded through the ARPA and ESSER grants total?
One at the high school and one at CPS.
So total of 2.0 FTEs that will go away when the funds go away, or they will be built into the base?
Well, we're going to look at, through the budget process, it might not necessarily be specifically related to those positions. We're going to look at whether we're able to reallocate resources, things like that, through our zero-based analysis of positions. And I don't want to kind of preempt our budget process, but there'll be a review and we'll determine what our needs are, and there may or may not be put into next year's FY 25.
So then then those positions would go away if they're not put in the budget?
If they're important, they won't go away. And so
So they'd be built into the base?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
And again, we don't know what the financial impact will be. We do know that we're going to be looking at our zero-based salary and position analysis, and it's possible there's offsets. We'll see. And then we have a very small balance in IDA, ARPA IDA, early childhood, that's now spent down. Our tier 2 capital plan. And so this is always a quiz for me. That's $1 million to $5 million. So I've just made a note that we haven't included the 900,000 because that's not tier 2. The items that we have on our radar that the school committees discussed in their meetings, they've recently approved bringing forward a warrant article for an amenities building in the CCHS stadium. We had a firm, Gale Associates,
So my recommendation, we're gonna have a meeting specifically on the capital plan 1, 2, and 3.
Okay,
Why don't we
Sure.
not talk about this here and talk about it at that meeting?
Great.
Okay,
that's a good
thanks.
point. Thank you. So that's in the memo. Spending level changes. I mean, what's really going to drive that is our zero-based analysis and our review of items in the strategic plan. Not everything in the strategic plan costs any, not everything in there costs something. Some items do, some items do not. We just are going to focus on certain things with existing staff and programs. I've included last year's NESDEC projections time-wise. We anticipate getting the next ones in December of this year. So those are in process, and we'll include those in our budget materials when we have them. I don't know if it'll be in time for the next probably not for the next guidelines presentation, but if they are, I'll include them. I've included a memo at the end here to the town planning board about enrollment as well. There is some potential impact to housing development to our enrollment levels, and that may not be short term. That we're not, depending on the timing of when that happens, but there is some potential impact to enrollments there.
Me talking a little bit
Sure.
more, just because there's a lot of moving pieces here with enrollment. And it's a pretty important conversation, I think, because of the housing changes and the shelter and a lot of moving parts. So you have this memo, but I'll just highlight some of the things I think that are important. We have seen some small decline in the last 5 years, which we were waiting for, to alleviate overcrowdedness, first at the elementaries, then the middle, and now the high school. So that's been a good thing, giving us some breathing space and not being quite so jam-packed. That said, we know there's housing developments out there, and we are here to receive all children that the town decides that they are looking to invite. So we're ready for that should it happen. A few highlights in terms of different populations that we're serving. METCO, we are now serving 52 students at Alcott, 26 at the middle school, and 44 at the high school. That's grant subsidized, as you know, and we can talk on that in detail when we present later. At the shelter, we are now enrolling. We have 28, and these change a little bit as days go by, but this is where we are today. We have 28 students enrolled K-8. We're transporting 14. And one of my biggest areas of watch now are preschoolers. We have not serviced preschool as long as they've been considered regular education students per the state's support. We are now getting referrals as families are getting connected to Boston Medical, DCF, early intervention, a pediatrician. And so we're now starting to identify children with special needs, and they are now starting to come to our preschool. I had 4 start today for the first time from the shelter, not subsidized. I'll say that again, not subsidized. So now we're not sure where that's going to go. We're trying to do some work at the shelter on site to try to support some of the needs with volunteers and such. Last count at the shelter, there are almost 40 children ages 3 and 4. So if the referrals keep coming, we're going to have capacity issues at the preschool. As you know, we added a class this summer, not factoring in the shelter. It did give us a little buffer here as we're identifying students, but that's going to be a story that evolves as the year goes on for sure.
So Lori,
yeah.
42 currently. What was it at the end of last year's school? Because
Yeah,
what was
so
that total number?
we had, and off the top of my head, we had enrolled
Roughly.
8 children had enrolled, and we were transporting about 22 to school of origin. The biggest change is that the young children have aged into kindergarten.
Sure.
We have 13 kindergartners.
Okay,
now.
so in district has increased. and
Yes.
Out is declined slightly.
Yeah, and we've had a few families who were commuting, decide
Sure.
to come and stay closer. That makes sense,
Yep.
right? So those have been the moving pieces. The big one has been kindergarten enrollment for
Beginning,
sure.
sure.
Yeah. And then just, other things of note, Carlisle and we obviously have the October 1 enrollments. They're pretty much static to last year, which is probably good news for everybody. So that we can get you the specifics on. And then we have other populations of kids, the teachers and faculty, CTA and CCTA members can enroll their children. So we have some of those kids in our schools. The new middle school is a wild card exactly. And the February of 25, what that might do for enrollments. We're built for 700. We're running about 650. So there's room for them, but we anecdotally know that people do come when you open a beautiful facility. And then the other wild cards that I'll just mention, private schools, we have very fluid relationships with private schools in towns. Many families have kids in both places and they come for certain grades and go for others. And that has its own nuance. And then obviously the Novo complex, and then the newest one being put on the radar this past week. So a lot of moving pieces there. And I think enrollment's going to be an important ongoing discussion, both regular ed, special ed, all of it. 'cause
When do you
does
expect the
drive
Novo
everything.
to hit?
What's that?
What has the planning department told you about when Novo will be completed?
I do not have any specific.
So we don't know whether it's.
I think the
fiscal year
hearing's later
25
this
yet, right?
month. Yeah.
Okay, and the new one that was just announced, we don't have it.
Tonight. It's happening as we
What
speak.
do you-
the
Well,
hearing.
wait a minute. Nobody's moved in yet. That's what I'm trying to understand when they
The
move in.
timeline here.
Now, I know the hearing's happening today,
There
right
isn't one
now,
yet, yeah.
right? And on the new one, we don't yet know the timeline either. So probably not for fiscal year 25.
Probably not.
Okay, just wanted to.
But
clarify.
that's me guessing. I don't actually know.
No, I understand, but
Yes.
probably not. So just be mindful of the moving pieces.
Yep.
I'm looking at the clock, right? So we had tried in the past years to stay high level. If we can do that and wrap up, so then Carrie and company can come forward, that would be helpful.
Okay. So I'll jump in just high level OPEB. We had favorable investment performance last year and we're making annual contributions of 550,000. So we will be more funded. We will have a revaluation of the liability. Our current funding schedule calls for a gradual drawdown. You'll see in our projections and reductions in how much we need to fund every year. Ed reforms and mandates. What we've shown you here is our revenue and uses of homeless grant funds. And I won't go through it into detail other than say the state funding is what's most useful. They give us $104 per day, more so than the federal government. You can see our primary uses are supporting an ELL teacher, 4 instructional assistants in Willard, and a family coordinator. And we've left a little balance for potential future needs this year.
Transportation was so that's not transportation, right? That's,
In
yeah,
district.
Yeah,
right. So
Yeah.
where are we with that? So we still, that was the item we talked about earlier, right? That was the 100,000 we were short on one of the, I think it's CPS. I can't remember which one now. But is that covered now? Are we going to be okay on transportation of the students that are here but go to school in Boston?
this is what we were talking about. We're like a pilot district.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
that
waiting
was that.
for-
Okay,
So we're gonna get
right. Okay,
last fiscal year's revenue in November.
right.
We're hoping that'll be enough of an offset to
Right.
get us through this coming year, although the expenses may be more, it won't be as dramatic. So
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
We'll certainly keep you posted.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
I've shared information on rental fees. I will just comment that the rental fees for the region are primarily due to me classifying light rentals as rental fees instead of miscellaneous income. So that's not really a true increase. Our new policy went into effect September 2022, and a lot of our big rentals are in the summer. So we'll see the impact in FY24 of those policy changes. And then additional information is just, there is some potential for favorable Chapter 70 revenue.
So I'm just curious, just go back to the rentals for a minute, and thank you for this. What happened to the utilization? I'm curious, because we see things sort of relatively steady fiscal year 18 through 20. Looking at CPS in particular. And then obviously with the coronavirus, things declined, it looks like. But I'm kind of curious, only 2,100 last fiscal year, like what happened to utilization?
Yeah,
Like nobody showed up for activities?
I would need, Parashar, I'd need to look into that more. I
Okay.
will say this, that's not, it's not our revenue, actually. It flows to the town. So there is possibility that I'm missing revenue that people might have remitted
So
directly.
the school set the utilization policies and then the revenue goes to the town
CPS.
Right
for
now.
CPS.
Yeah. There's a mechanism to have it come
Okay.
to the schools, but we'll bring that up some other time. It's not a lot of money, but we just created a facilities rental revolving fund at the region. That might be something we'd want to do at the town. Instead of it going to miscellaneous income, it goes to a revolving fund you can use to offset your
I prefer to
expenses.
go to the town, to be honest with you, particularly because the town owns the facilities, right? They
Yeah,
own the
we're-
schools. Yeah, well-
They cover maintenance.
Yeah, we can debate it another time, but in any case, okay, that'd be good, thanks.
I have a couple, oh,
Sorry,
I'm
go-
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Bob, are you finished yet?
The last item is just background on Chapter 70. It's a very complicated formula. I'm not going to go into it.
Oh, good. So I do have a question, and I should have asked Carrie the same question. Are you finding that you're having difficulty in finding new employees, or are you having a turnover? What's happening at the schools, and then what's happening with the town?
Sure. In terms of professional staff, we're doing pretty well as a district here. That is not the case in many other districts, but because we are who we are and we're a favorable district that people are excited to work in, we've been able to pretty successfully maintain our professional teacher positions, et cetera. The place we've been struggling is support staff and custodial support, having a good number of vacancies open for quite a while. We actually pivoted earlier in the fall and started to engage with some of the residents at the shelter who are craving work. And we've been able to tap them. We've hired four custodians and I think 5 assistants now. Obviously, the language has to be part of the discussion and we're supporting everyone on that. In many cases, they've actually been able to work with the children coming from the shelter and talk in their home language in a way we didn't have much capacity for prior to, but it's the support positions we've been struggling in and we're getting creative. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're really excited to give up jobs to people who are so eager to work and win-win.
Carrie, did you want to?
Well,
comment?
let's have Carrie do it during her discussion.
Yeah, I just
Because
had,
she's coming up to.
yes, I have one
discuss
more
more.
question for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
superintendent.
Okay.
So, remember last year we had a discussion about the ranking of the system? And there was a discussion about how it was Boston Magazine or which one that you had issues with the data that they had used. So they came out again and we were 28 or something. Yeah, so what's going, all right, so that's what the answer is, it's bad data.
The school committee chairs have been diving in deeper and deeper to that, and we aren't hitting any place that changes anything, but we're better understanding the problems with the rankings. It's a whole presentation on its own.
Okay. Thank you.
So Bob, are you gonna go into the PowerPoint slides you shared with
Yep.
us now?
So I
Okay,
think I'm
thank
gonna
you.
need to stop sharing this one and reshare in a second.
Slide 4, I think.
And I think to the extent you've covered some of this, just,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so. am I advancing? Okay. So I'm gonna jump over the strategic planning initiatives and I'll dive right into the 5-year view. And so just to orient to format, this is a format we talked about Parashar last year, where we kind of have a high level all funds view at the top, including all funding sources. We then highlight what our funding sources are from grants, revolving funds and circuit breaker, and kind of and then show what the remainder is, which is our general fund, the piece that our general fund's paying for. So you can see in FY24 that ties to our general fund budget. We are projecting some growth, but relatively modest growth from 25 through 29. And there's more detail on that on the next slide, which I'll go into shortly, but I'll spend this talking a little bit more about the revenue. We're in the grants piece, while ESSER is going away, we might have a trickle into FY25. We do now have grants for homeless support that are coming in. And we also have typically some modest year-over-year cost of living type adjustment for the entitlement grants that we receive. So we kind of project that to be relatively steady growth after FY25. In the duration, the big wild card, in the duration of the shelter, and we're just assuming that's going to be in from 25 through 29. If that changes, we'll adjust as we find out. Revolving funds include for CPS, food service is a lot of that, and so it's just going to go in at the top line and come out at revolving. It's basically a break-even operation, so it doesn't fall out to the general fund, and they do have a surplus balance that they're permitted to carry that prevents us from having to access the general fund for food service because of the well-run program by our food service director and student participation. Circuit breakers increasing. Really, it's being driven by our out-of-district cost, relatively modest though. And I would say the funding formula that the state has is now factoring in transportation, and they're gradually phasing in a little bit more transportation into the formula. So used to be that just tuition was reimbursed, and so now they've recognized that that's not the full cost of being out of district. So I want to highlight how we presented the bottom section here. Our general fund increase there is inclusive, so 1.6% in 25 projected, 0.4 in 26, and I think it'll make sense why when you see the next slide. And then 1.5, 1.5, 1.6. Those include steps and lanes, net of retirements. So we've made an assumption of what salaries might happen as people advance in experience and in education. And we've assumed some net of retirements. This year, we really haven't received any, maybe one notification. So we forecast, you'll see on the next slide, a 0.5% increase there, and then 0.25% in the following years. And then what we've shown at the bottom here is what the impact of 1% cost of living increase to teacher salaries. And by CTA, I mean, not just teachers, but school psychologists, adjustment counselors, specialist teachers.
It's everybody in the bargaining unit, right?
Exactly.
Okay, good, thank you.
So, for example, in FY25, that's 268,000. 1% would be a $268,000 increase. And then over FY24, and that's 0.6% of our $45 million budget.
60% of the budget roughly.
So I just wanted to give some transparency to this. We
No,
don't want to
good.
get into predicting, and we want to respect the collective
No,
bargaining
so
process.
that's the cost, right? Now you put it on the revenue page maybe for spacing.
Mhm.
But what you're saying is on the next slide, those costs for those COLA increases are not included in your forecast?
Correct.
And if one were to model, say, a 5% increase or a 2% or a 7% increase, we can use those numbers as rough guidelines.
That's the intent.
Perfect.
So,
Thank you. That's good.
and I have my, that's what the footer, the footnote is, just so people, in case they look at this later. So when I look at the trends, I've already talked about the teachers. The non-teachers, we're forecasting 3%. I'll just point out kind of the ones that are a little bit
Yeah.
different. So the first one is contract services. We have seen, I know in our large construction projects, but even smaller construction, when we have services we're procuring with contractors, everything is coming in above what we, project and anticipate. And, we hope for some moderation. Some of these services that are smaller, there's not quite as much of a discrepancy. And this isn't just facilities contract services. So there's other items where it might not be quite as much of an increase. So this is kind of a blended rate, 4.5. And we work, we pit vendors and contractors against each other to make sure we're getting good pricing. And so we'll continue to pay attention to that. Supplies and materials is another one where we've seen some pressure from publishing companies and curriculum companies.
Especially in the electronic, obviously we're doing a lot of electronic textbooks and things, and they're all increasing prices pretty significantly year to year. We hadn't factored in enough, even close in FY24, and we've had to reallocate some funds just to cover the increase.
So kind of curious, can you talk about the two in yellow?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
let's-
that's
let's go there.
intentional. That's because we've talked about the district making a commitment to cut $500,000 when the middle school goes online as a single school. So in FY26, those are the two items we have identified as where we're showing that. They may come out from potentially a different line, but I did want to make clear that we've factored into our forecast $500,000 in reductions coming out. And that's something we'll work on identifying for the FY26 budget planning process.
Are you gonna do that for every year?
Well, once we're past 26, it's all done. We don't have to do it
It's mostly
anymore.
consolidation of duplicated pieces, sorry.
Always looking, always looking.
But it's in the base, D, right?
It will
So
be in the
stays
base,
there, It
yes.
stays there. yeah.
27.
It's out of the-
Non-teacher salaries, the 3% is based on the lower
Correct,
number.
Right.
yes.
Because
So in that way it carries.
the
forward.
13, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And then what about the other expenses? No, it's minus 6.7,
Well,
the other
that's
yellow.
that's where we anticipate some of the expenses coming out.
There's a lot of work to do there,
Yeah.
though. We're not too far into that. We just know.
Is that because of the middle school? Is that what?
Yes,
We
yeah.
collapse Peabody and Sanborn
No,
together.
no, that's fine. That's fine.
Got the
Okay.
savings, a variety of reasons.
Yeah, okay.
Bob, how come we don't include debt service in your,
CPS,
yeah,
this is CPS, so we don't incur the.
It's
debt
in,
service.
it's in the town.
Town carries.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but well, from a P&L perspective, it's there. It's the cost of having the school. Just curious
Yeah.
why it isn't shown that way.
Yeah, I don't even know what it is. I
It's
would
the
have to
town's
get it from
numbers.
Carrie.
We can do that for the,
It is.
we can do we can do it for the finance
give
committee
it to you.
report.
Well, there's also 3 elementary projects from 20 years.
Yeah,
ago.
there are. Yeah, yeah.
And then there's a sick leave retirement incentive
Which-
program that's kind of waning away. So we're anticipating that trickling down over time.
Go to the region.
So there's a lot of data on this slide, but the same general information. The only thing that's different is I've included the general fund revenue. And similar trend, looking at the grants, we actually project a little bit of a decline in 25 because there is less of an offsetting increase in the homeless grants. There's less students at the high school. And we project, similarly to CPS, some growth in the revolving. The circuit breaker, we did leverage a bit in FY24, and we kind of will normalize that and then 25 to use what we anticipate the revenue to be and kind of match expense and revenue. But again, in the prior year budget, we intentionally plan to access a little bit more circuit breaker. Our general fund revenue, we've projected what we can for chapter 70 and chapter 71. There is some potential opportunity. We're getting, we're a minimum aid district. We get a minimum increase, but with the formula for the Student Opportunity Act, there is some potential with the funding model they have. They're in year 4 of year 7. They're putting in a plan to provide more funding, and really not many communities have get the benefit. But as you get later in it and you get closer to not being a minimum aid district, you can potentially see a spike in chapter 70 revenue. It's very complicated and not something I can explain too quickly, so I'm going to skip it unless anybody wants to. But so again, that's a potential, and we'll find that out in January after we present it. And if it's more, we'll adjust our budget, and that'll be a relief to the assessments.
The allocation between, the projected allocation between Carlisle and Concord, it looks like Concord goes up again in 25. We had gone down
Tiny bit.
tiny bit. Yeah, I just thought it was going to keep going down.
Well, we thought it was too.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Did something change or?
Couple of kids swung
Uh.
a little bit. It'll change, will show up in there. Okay.
And I have that on the next slide. I'm going to just highlight a couple things. So the other revenue we forecasted, that's primarily the primary driver of the revenue increase. We're also, we've in E&D been budgeting to use 300,000 every year, kind of similar to, you potentially using free cash to fund your operating budget. That's what we're doing with E&D. And I think that it would be prudent for us to ratchet that down over time. So we're doing it slowly, 50,000 a year, so that we don't have an effect to the assessments in a given year. I've shown the same information on COLA impact to the region. It's a little bit less. It's 0.5% because the region-based budget has OPEB, it has benefits, it has things that the CPS budget does not. So again, 2.1, 1.4, 1.3, 1.5.
So with the E&D, what do you typically use that money for?
It funds so out of our budget of 37,811,098.
Yep.
That'll be funded by revenue of 300 less than 37,811,098, and we just draw down our surplus for the other 300 of the budget.
Okay.
Remind me on the preliminary growth projection slide, the next one, or maybe you're going to cover it. on
Well,
the
I'll
next
jump
one.
to the next one.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Where are the benefits? Because isn't that? Because I know CPS
Yeah.
benefits are in the town.
If you look down, it's.
Insurance. I
the
put it in,
7th one.
yeah, I put it in insurance. So that
Oh,
includes
I was
mo-
looking at the previous slide. Never mind.
Yeah.
Okay, it's down
most
here,
of that
insurance.
is,
Okay.
most of that's health insurance. It's not
Yeah,
all.
no, I'm
it's
sorry. I was
property
looking at the
casualty.
wrong slide. Never mind.
Okay.
I was looking at
To your point, that
CPS.
whole second half of
Okay.
the list is all
And so this is one where you think it might be a 0% increase? Is regional school district gonna be
Will-
included in these?
Yes.
We'll be synced up with the town on this.
Okay.
And you know, our discussion was about a week and a half ago, and we thought, well, at that point in time, let's make an assumption of 3.5, and
see.
we'll be talking again, getting guidance.
120,000.
So yeah, that would certainly help.
It's evolving as we speak, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
A couple of things that are, you know, potentially just longer term favorable trends. I mean, we are a community, and our regional district's different, that, you know, we have pretty well-funded retirement and our OPEB plan as well. So if you look at FY24 and then look at FY29, I think the retirement program, their funding policy for their unamortized liability calls for like a 20% drop in 29. So I've just factored that in, assuming that we're going to get that as well.
Yep.
And our OPEB funding plan has a gradual drawdown as well. So those are things that I've factored into the plan here. A lot of the other assumptions are similar to CPS. And
But why, I know it's way out there in the distance, but there's a noticeable drop in retirement for 29. What's happened? What explains that?
the Concord Retirement Board's projection is that they'll be fully funded, and that we will no longer need to make these catch-up contributions to become fully funded.
So so retirement line is catch-up contributions?
Not all of it, a piece of it is.
A piece of it
Yeah,
is. Okay,
yeah,
I
yeah.
see. Okay, thank you.
And the debt, I've factored in the impact of the access road. Our debt's set up in a way that we have, the ones we've had in the past, they're set up to be declining debt service. So that's why it's declining. And this does include the impact of the CCHS access road, which is only $40,000 in interest this year. We don't need to pay down any principal in the first 2 years. And then I factored in some principal pay down starting in the third year.
Did you borrow all of it?
We did, and it's,
So it's
no,
sitting there, no?
we did not
No.
borrow it.
You borrowed some of it? Half.
Yeah. And there was some money left in capital stabilization as well, about 200,000 that we accessed. So, so that's kind of a high level view. I think I have on the next slide, what the net assessment to the towns is. And again, this does not include the COLA. At the bottom, you can see the COLA impact. What the share was last year to this year, it's almost static, not quite. Based on me seeing that our projection last year and the shift, I was just going to leave it constant from 26 to 29 based on 25. And we'll do separate analysis to look at that and see if we can.
So those assessments are static. 'Cause I know Carlisle's here too. We didn't look at the numbers further out.
Yeah.
So.
I have a question, Bob. So did you compare the projections that we did last year for the out years to what we have now? Did you take a look at that to say, hey, how we doing? Yeah, what did that show? I haven't done it. I haven't gone back and looked.
Not too much of a difference. I think that, I mean, for this year, the revenue was more favorable at the region, like specifically in 25.
Mm.
We hadn't forecast that at the time. I wasn't aware that I was 3 months in last year, 2 months in. So I missed that the sick leave and retirement plans are declining. So I had forecast those to continue to
Be
stay
flat.
level.
Mhm.
And then the OPEB, I, looked into more detail and saw that we had a declining funding plan for that, as well as the retirement item I caught in 29. A lot of the other items, we had factored in like 1 year bump in 24 because of like we had the out of district tuition
Mhm.
bump that we weren't ready for. We saw we forecast higher increase for contract services in 24. We're budgeting for it to be a little bit more stable, or forecasting it to be a little more stable, but those were kind of the big things. And then kind of just leaving the COLA impact on the teachers out and
Right.
seeing where that goes.
So generally, we were overstating last year. Is that way to look at in the projections? We were higher than we needed to be.
I
For
think
the high
we came
school?
up we came up pretty close for 25.
Okay,
Because also the base for 24 was a little bit higher than we had projected it.
okay.
That's just projections to projections.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, I mean, you know, when we started this whole process, trying to sort of look back and see how you did, a lot of factors changed. I don't necessarily want to hold folks to what happened last year or the year before. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Projections.
Cross those projections out.
Yeah.
Something like that.
But I do it as a sanity check more.
Yeah, no, it's fine. But we're not gonna make a habit of looking back and doing that because a lot of things change. Any questions? Oh, you have one more slide, sorry.
Just timelines.
Yep.
These changed. I didn't have
Yeah,
time to
they
update
just
the
changed
slides.
then.
So December 5 is the initial budget presentation to
Okay.
the school committee. We'll be reviewing it before
Yeah,
then
so
together.
the 21st isn't the date now.
So
Oh,
So there'll be, most of the actual budget presentation will be December 5th.
Okay.
We'll be previewing on the 14th with the school committee what we're gonna bring to you on the 16th,
Hmm.
which will be updates on this and probably some status on where we are with the budget bill.
And what's the timeline for the contract negotiation?
We've started some initial reach out to the unions. We don't want to wait too long 'cause to do both bargaining units is a pretty big lift. So I think we're all hoping to get up and going in November, December and have some momentum going into the new year, so that we're not running real tight on the other end in June. So,
when have they typically finished in the past?
June, COVID had some impact. We've run in, with one of them, we ran into July once. Too many other things going on, but
So the-
typically we're done before we expire the month.
So November, December, you start and before the end of June
Yeah.
is when you're wrapping up and, unfair question, but I'll ask anyway. When do you get a sense of, well, we're just dotting the i's and crossing the t's, which is why it's taken from June 1st to the 14th versus the major elements being kind of locked?
We won't know till into the-
But in the past, how's that been?
And it's ranged quite a bit, actually. Sometimes there's slower ramp ups and then other times we get, it's really ranged
Yeah.
depending on what the proposals are
Okay.
at the moment.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Other questions from the committee? Did you have a question, Dave?
No, but I was wondering if somebody from Carlisle who's here, if she'd be able to ask a question at this time of the school? Is that okay with you?
We'll go to Carlisle.
Oh, you're gonna go to,
Chat with them.
oh, okay. Okay.
Always do.
We don't get to dictate the budget.
Okay.
They're gonna be well informed, which is great.
Good. Clausy, Lois, any questions on your end? Who else was online?
Carlin's online.
And Carlin, yep. Any questions? No questions from Lois? Okay. So if you can do us a favor, the tables, these tables, just like last year, can you send an Excel version to Lois and Lindsay? You can send them to Anthony and he can forward them, but that way, just like we've done the last couple of years, we'll take these numbers, take the town numbers, present a consolidated view for the residents in terms of what the total spending looks like and the overall change, right? And that'll also help us with the guideline development process.
So
Okay.
just each of the slides in the guideline presentation.
Yeah, the spreadsheet that
Okay.
came out of here.
Yep.
If you can send them to Anthony, that way he can forward them. And if other members of the FinCom want to play with spreadsheets, help yourself. But Lindsay and Lois will need them. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We will see you guys in a couple of weeks.
All
Keep
right.
those pencils sharp. We are going to, at the end of this meeting, quickly go into the guidelines committee meeting. I don't know if you're gonna stick around then or not, but we can tell you what we're thinking. If you don't want to stick around, it's up to you. That's perfectly fine. You can make the committee chair stick around. All right. Cool, thanks.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Okay. So we actually talked quite a bit about this at the last meeting in terms of the forecast. So I am going to try to hit the highlights here. There is a packet of information that was sent out with your agenda, and we have what I hope is a fairly short slide presentation. So you had asked that we identify the top 3 to 5 strategic issues, and we've identified them as recruitment, retention, maintaining capital infrastructure, and balancing service level expectations through strategic planning. There is a pretty extensive discussion of it in the packet. I think I'm just going to make a couple of points, and I know you asked Superintendent Hunter about recruitment, more recruitment and retention. We have struggled, but things seem to be getting better. We have, for the last several recruitments we've done, we have more applicants. We have what we feel is a stronger applicant pool, and we're able to fill positions. And we do think that has a lot to do with the class and comp study that we just implemented at the beginning of this fiscal year. We're still, I feel like we're constantly recruiting in the police department, a little bit less so in the fire department, but it's very hard to fill those positions. But it does seem like things are getting better. We are doing a lot of analysis every time there's an open position, particularly if it's a supervisory position or above, looking at the organizational structure to see if there are opportunities to make adjustments. One of the things we're trying to create is a more resilient organization and some succession planning, because when we lose certain positions, we have big holes in the organization. So there's some information in the packet about that. If we could just go to capital infrastructure.
Can I ask one question
sure.
on that subject? So I read your package. I think I understand what you said, but one question that I had when you call it recruitment and retention, do you have some specific goals that you say, I want attrition to be X? Or is it just a general conversation about comp? I'm just trying to understand. You have some specific goals that you say,
Yeah.
hey, I want retention to be this, and I want my comps to be X, and I'm going to hit it by X timeline. I'm just trying to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're working to get to that point. We're not there yet. We're working with the personnel board and hoping to be able to have that so we can have metrics and
Okay.
we can benchmark against
Okay,
those.
thank you.
So then in terms of capital infrastructure, again, I know we have an upcoming hearing, so I don't want to spend too much time on this other than to point out that if we were actually to meet the policy target of funding 2 to 3% of our capital with cash, we would be in great shape, and we would be able to maintain those tier 1 items according to the schedules that we have developed. But we have not done that in the last several years. And before the pandemic, really, we're just funding at the 2% level and not really much higher than that.
Because we don't have cash, or we don't want to borrow?
Well,
Why
because
can't we hit it?
Because we can't fit it. The tier 1 capital is part of the guideline, and we have not
Exactly.
been able to
Yeah.
fit additional funding
And
there.
is tier 1, would we call those maintenance type items? And again, that's, what is it, 0 to $500,000, or what's, I feel what the cutoff is?
Well, we use 250,000
250,000.
as the cutoff, and they're mostly vehicles,
Mostly vehicles.
replacement of court surfaces, minor building improvements. So for the most part, they're maintenance
Maintenance,
items.
yeah. So one of the conversations.
We're going to get into more detail at the capital
No,
forum.
I understand, but one of the conversations that we had from a policy perspective last year
Yes,
with Bob was whether
changing this
maintenance items should
process.
out of the
Right.
guideline, right?
So
making
Carrie and
it
I
easier
talked
for
about
them.
trying to
Yeah.
look at that, but obviously there are other things that are going on with the finance department. So
Yeah.
did Bob or Steve
Anthony.
Well, no, but Steve, hold on. In fairness to me, no. In fairness to me, Steve, I think, was gonna pick up where Bob had left off.
Oh.
Right, yeah, and so I don't know whether that happened or whether it hasn't, and then Anthony will do it once everything else gets stabilized.
In terms of,
In terms of looking at our policies around capital and whether we want to borrow and not borrow, what we want to borrow for, that sort of stuff.
yeah,
Right, because Bob had some.
Bob had some ideas and I don't know whether that ever got implemented. But again, we could talk the details at the forum.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But if you keep it out of the guideline, you solve the problem a little bit, right?
Well, we
Well,
solve one problem and
yeah.
then you create another one. Let's.
Well, you still have to pay for it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we, I'm sorry to,
Yeah.
I think we might have missed this page. I was looking at the, full-time equivalent for, general fund, this little table. And in, fiscal 15, 10 years ago, we had 224. Now we have 260, so that's kind of 36 in the course of 10 years. And, well, and you point out that the town manager's office hasn't seen any growth, but that's a major concern to me. It's a 36. You know, I mean, that's a lot of full-time equivalent growth. And how are we gonna either curb it or turn it back? And I think at some point we need to think about reducing services, if, possibly.
So
Everybody always wants more and more people doing more and more stuff. I'm not sure.
So that's really our third strategic item. I'm not going to dispute, that's a lot of growth. And I can tell you, it's a challenge for the organization to be able to absorb that kind of growth without any change in the management structure,
Right.
essentially. And that was the point of that slide, to address some issues, because there are changes to management structure that were presented, and there was some feedback that select board members received. And that was the point of that, not to make anybody feel bad for the town manager's office, but just that, there has been significant growth, and you need to be able to manage and supervise the activities of staff so that you're, getting a good bang for your buck.
And the strategic plan seems to be.
Well,
offering
yeah, why don't we have
an
Carrie talk about what she's planning to do?
additional level of expectation, but. Yeah, sorry.
Carrie, go ahead.
So the third item that we identified was balancing service level expectations through strategic planning. And what's noted here is we have lots of different planning documents that we work from. And often we'd like to think that all of the goals and objectives that are identified match nicely with everything, but they don't always. Sometimes they're at cross purposes. Sometimes they cause a need for growth in other areas, in addition to maybe growth in the area that the plan is addressing. And so what we're finding is we don't always have the same shared goals and objectives. And I know internal to our organization, I hear all the time about the silos that we have in our organization. And I like to push back and say, I think it's reflective of the community and how the community advances efforts, where we're not always building the coalitions that we need to. And I think often that the organization has reacted to that by helping the committee that it works with advance their goals and not necessarily working together. So the thought here was, and we actually have a small amount of funding built into the fiscal 24 budget, to just sit down and not create another plan, but create a roadmap and some strategies for bringing these together and helping to identify on an annual basis, what are the shared goals and objectives that we're all going to agree to, in the hope that that's going to help us understand where we need to be prioritizing funding. So that's what that is there. You next asked.
Oh,
Can I
I'm
ask
sorry,
you-
hold on. Carlin, I think had her hand, and then we can have, thanks, Anthony.
Thanks.
Carl, and then we'll have D.
Thanks, Prashar. Carrie, where does the recreation strategic plan fit into this whole thing? Because I can see that service level expectations could be kind of high based on what that early draft looked like, but I don't know where it stands now.
So the recreation strategic plan is still in the development process. It is getting close to a final draft that will go to the Recreation Commission. And one of the discussions that I will be having with the Recreation Commission, it was actually supposed to happen this week, but it didn't happen, was where funding is coming from. So the Recreation Revolving Fund, that we have a recreation revolving fund. We operate that under a town bylaw that calls for both operating and park maintenance to be paid for from the rec revolving fund. And we have really gotten away from charging any maintenance or rental fee for recreational facilities, and the rec revolving fund really is just paying for operating. What has happened is their fund balance has really, it's just increased and increased to the point where it's close to $2 million. And so we are starting that discussion because we have a lot of recreational needs. We have a lot of courts that need to be resurfaced and improvements. And the improvements, I would say, over the last decade to 15 years have been borne by the general fund, either tier 1 capital or tier 2 capital, and not from the rec revolving fund. So that needs to get addressed, because
So in my mind, that's a perfect example of not having an overall roadmap as to where the priorities are going for general fund revenue. Leads to situations like that, right?
Well, it's,
Left hand, right hand.
yeah, and I think when we start a planning process by trying to identify everything everybody wants, that's
Right.
That's a big bill.
Yeah, no, I agree. So this is good.
I actually, I sat in on a recent meeting with the consultant and the team on that project, and Carlin, I was actually pleased that it didn't look as high dollar as I expected it to. Some of their near-term projects are having a standard for parks. So if you go into an area, it's a town of Concord park, because it's got the same type of signage and it's got similar amenities and that sort of thing. We also, through that process, we also identified in some places we have more than the national average. So for instance, we have, I think, 3 times as many tennis courts as the national average, according to the National Parks and Rec Association. We have this huge demand for pickleball, and people who play pickleball, we're using, it's a multi-use court, but perhaps when we resurface some of these courts, we can just stripe them for pickleball. They're still outside, they're not indoor courts. And I know there's an interest in indoor courts as well, but that would be an easy way to meet a need of, a growing need.
Dee, did you have a question?
I'm going to pass.
Oh, good.
Okay, yeah,
thank
I'm,
you. Oh,
I know, already. I just put on the table, I don't understand why the school is looking at putting in a track when we have a track at Emerson. And what are we gonna do with that? So I just want to make sure that's
that's good
somewhere
for
in
the
the
for the
equation, we're not-
capital meeting, November.
yeah, I think that's exactly right.
not tonight's discussion.
No, but you should make a note of that and bring it up then. Seriously, that's good. It's those types of conversations we should have. Okay, keep going.
So then you next asked about our ARPA historical and projected spending. Just to remind the committee, we received $5,654,000 in ARPA funds back in fiscal 22. The select board suggested that we look at programming about a fifth of those funds, about 20% each year for a 5-year period. We received the funds a little bit later in fiscal 22. And so that impacted, we didn't fully program 22 and 23 according to what the select board recommended. But we did program 800,000 in 22, 923 in the current year, $1,320,000. So we do have just over $3 million committed and about $2.6 million left to program. We would propose to program another $1,320,000 in fiscal 25, and we're looking at that in the context of our capital improvement plan that we'll be presenting.
So same question for you. Were any of these devoted to FTEs? And if so, how many?
Yeah. So what we did in 2 occasions, we used some funding to advance positions that we had lined up. So we had a transportation planner that we had funded part-time. We used some ARPA funds to move that full-time. That was intended to be a full-time position, but we moved that up based upon based upon our needs. We did the same with the economic vitality manager. Both of those positions are 1 FTE within our general fund budget.
And
that's-
so that is built into the base, just like the schools
it is.
FTs. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And both of those positions were emphasized in the townwide master plan.
They were.
They were.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we would have funded them. We would have waited and funded them in the following fiscal year, but we did advance using ARPA. The only other ARPA funding that we've used for any salary is we have a GIS analyst who retired, and we had a small pile of work, and so we used on a limited basis. She's completing some work on a part-time basis, but that will phase out. But that
Almost
was just to
consulting.
catch up.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So then our 5-year plan, we haven't done anything with it since we presented it to you last time. So I will make the same comment because we are not at all along in our fiscal 25 budget process. So I don't have any additional.
So these numbers are the same from last year?
No, they're the same as, was it the last meeting that we
No,
talked
we
about
never,
these, or-
did we have 5-year numbers at the last meeting? Because if we did, I was asleep.
It happened.
Was that the meeting you were not here?
No, I think I was here.
Later.
Sorry?
Yeah.
I don't think we did.
I don't think we did.
Talk about a projection.
Yeah, I don't think we did.
No, we did not at the last meeting,
Yeah.
but maybe,
I thought we did have a draft of
Oh,
the
it was the
5.
last meeting because we talked about the retirement assessment going down
Yes, but
in
we
the out
didn't do
years.
Relative to this, we only had a couple of years. I think we had a couple high level, doesn't matter. What I'm hearing, what
Yeah.
we're hearing is that these are current. Just like what the school had was current also, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
With
That's
the-
all that
with the
matters.
caveat that it is producing a very large increase that we don't expect. But we have not yet done any additional work.
So in
with
other words, that
this.
8.52% increase.
Right, we're
you
not.
are okay, that's fine.
But I will say that 8.52% is a result of funding tier 1 capital at the top.
Yeah, no, that's good to know,
So
actually.
if we take that out, it
Yep.
brings it down to a number that's still not acceptable, but it's
Much
it's
No, but
it's
this is good to
lower.
know because it
Yeah.
helps with prioritization.
I will tell you that fiscal 25 is also our big union negotiation year. We have 5 of 6 union contracts that are up for negotiation. Our practice is we put set a certain amount of funding aside in the salary reserve. We've always done that. Every community I've worked in, we've done that. I understand the school takes a different position, but that's the way that we do things. So we're projecting our overall salary increase at 4%.
Okay.
Um,
It could be higher or could be lower based on what you're saying in terms of the collective bargaining, right?
well,
Or no?
we don't know what will happen with collective bargaining, but
Okay.
we would not expect it to be higher than an overall 4%.
see.
And that would not be in keeping with the one union contract that we have
I see.
settled.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. So on the timeline, I think somebody else asked that of the schools, Don did. So what's our timeline for the town
In terms
in
of,
terms of negotiations? When they start, when
Negotiations.
do you expect them to?
so we would typically start in January.
Okay.
We do wait to hear from the unions.
Mhm.
And we typically would hear from them right after. And I would say we would hope to conclude before town meeting.
Okay. Oh, good.
And what percent of your employee population is covered by those five unions? Is it 30%?
By our union employees are about 60% in total.
Mhm. So it's most of the 60% is coming. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And the school's doing it the same year?
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah.
Are you good with the forecast? Okay.
Yeah.
So then you asked a bunch of questions and that's in the appendix.
So just
Um,
before we go off the forecast, if you can do the same thing, Anthony, and just send the Excel spreadsheet to whoever wants them, but specifically to Lindsay and Lois, that would be good. Okay, thanks. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So you asked about fiscal 23 close and where
Mm.
we are relative in fiscal 24. As I mentioned when we were talking about revenues, fiscal 23 is looking very positive. We expect to close about $800,000 in budget to free cash, and receipts. It looks like we have about $3 million coming back. And again, 1.5 of that we would be proposing that you would recommend putting that in the middle school stabilization fund. We don't have a free cash calculation just yet. I hope in a couple of weeks or so. I think we're waiting for a few closeout items in a couple of
You're still
different
closing the
areas.
budget, right? The books are still, yeah.
We are, yeah. In fiscal 24, we're not seeing anything remarkable. We're not running over budget in any area. We are seeing, a stronger investment income at this point, and that is relative to budget, because we put the budget together a year ago and weren't necessarily thinking about the investment income that we would have and or that the rates would be doing what they're doing. So then you asked about potential increases in spending levels going forward in the next 5 years. I mentioned capital investment. We definitely need to be doing better in that area. Ambulance, which Carlin asked about before, and I will say that we are in a feasibility study. We're doing an internal feasibility study to determine whether or not it makes sense to increase our service level from basic life support to advanced life support. So there's been no decision made. I don't have any information to provide because we're going through that process. We do expect to have that done by the end of the calendar year. And it is undecided how we would move forward and at what pace.
And
we
what's
would
the
move forward.
basic rationale for considering ALS versus basic?
The basic rationale is that we receive ALS service through a collaborative of a smaller number of communities than we started with. And there is a concern that the collaborative will not be able to support itself. because the provider is a for-profit. And for anybody who's lived in town 20 years or so, you might remember that ALS used to be provided through Emerson Hospital, and without a whole lot of notice, that service was disbanded. And we have seen that in a few different places where when the hospital makes a decision to stop providing a service, like it did this past year with public health nursing, we had a contract with them, and within a 60-day period, they stopped that service. And so there's just a concern. There's enough of a concern. Communities have been leaving it and establishing their own ALS because they don't want to be in a position of scrambling when it comes to that.
Carlin, does that answer your question, or did you have follow-up questions?
A follow-up just briefly. I understand the presentation is going to be made to you by the fire department on this. Look to see the cost benefit analysis, because you need specialized equipment in the ambulance. And I saw that you purchased a new ambulance this year, but you also need specialized training of the personnel. Those two cost factors will increase your expense level for the fire department. There will be some offsets because you're getting paid by Medicare for this transport of individuals, pretty much who are on ventilators from the hospital, from Emerson to, say, a rehab facility, and that can be a money generator. But you have to look at both sides of the equation. So make sure the fire department gives you both pieces of that information. That's it.
I'm completely confident that the fire department is going to do a very extensive review. We have, if anybody is interested, probably 7 or 8 years ago, we did an in-house feasibility analysis on Station 2, the ambulance at Station 2, and you can look at the quality of the work that was done. And we have the same gentleman leading up this feasibility study internally, Assistant Chief Brian Whitney, really did a nice job then, and I know he'll do a nice job now and be very thorough. I also identified both senior services and social services as areas where we receive a lot of requests for services, and we don't have any specific items proposed, but it wouldn't surprise me if we see more and more requests that might result in budget proposals in the next 5-year period. I will just briefly touch on pension and OPEB. Bob talked, it's the same story for us as it is for him. We did put in a sampling of AAA rated communities and showed what their unfunded pension and OPEB liability was. This group was pulled, and a lot of these are not communities that we typically compare to, but they were pulled because they are best positioned in terms of these two unfunded liabilities. So you can see how well Concord is positioned among the best positioned community, AAA rated communities. I mean, this is a huge success story here. And then on the bottom, you can see, if you're looking at the 10-year horizon, that we expect to have the OPEB liability fully funded at the end of fiscal 30, and the retirement at the end of 29. And again, the retirement assessment is two-part. One is the operating expenses of the retirement system, the ongoing, and the other is a share of the unfunded liability. And it's that share of the unfunded liability that, according to the most recent valuation, will be paid off at the end of fiscal 29. And you see a significant decrease in the assessment, the retirement assessment.
Question. So if we decide to slow that down, I mean, we're in a great position, sort of like refinancing your house from 15 to 30 years or something like that. Where would that money flow to? Would it flow to our operating budget? Oh, sorry. would that flow to our operating budget? Or is it coming from a pocket that's not available?
So the OPEB liability, you may remember, I don't know if it 2 or 3 fiscal years ago now, we decided to go to a level payment amortization so that we could smooth the impact to the budget. There's no legal requirement to fund that liability, so the town could slow that down. That assessment is competing with the general fund. So if we reduce that, there would be more money, potentially more money available to the operating budgets. So the retirement system is a little different because there is a legal requirement to fund. Fiscal 2040 is the last date by which you can have it funded. But it is the retirement board. The retirement system is independent of the town of Concord, and it is the retirement board that decides what the amortization schedule is and then assesses the communities. The increases have been within 3 to 5%, which are very low if you look at what other retirement systems are doing. The town does have a pension reserve account, so we further smooth the smoothing that the retirement system does by using the pension reserve. And one of the pieces of work that we need to do is to do an analysis on the pension reserve to see if our assumption of what we would pull from that is still holds, or if we should be pulling more from that.
So the 1.467, because I was headed the same way, but we could decide if we want to lower the impact on property taxes, frankly, we could decide to delay funding that, maybe even drop it to 0, because I look at good old Weston, laggards that they are, and even Dover and others were much better than them. So we could delay it for a couple of years, it sounds like.
You could.
Okay.
What I would say is you need to think about the bond rating.
Sure, but these are all AAA also, right? So yeah.
Right, but we are a AAA on fumes, I would say. If you know from talking to the financial advisor that if you look at the last page of our credit rating, we do not trend at a AAA. We are just so high in certain places that the rating agency forces the AAA for Concord because of property values. And so I'm not going to say if you change this, that's going to be the problem, because it won't for a year, or if you cut it in half. But if we continue to not fund it,
Sure.
when the finance committee in particular has made this an issue with the regional school district, with Minuteman, that would be out of keeping with sort of the philosophy of finance.
But sometimes the
was
times are changing.
I was thinking, if we get
Yeah,
that
it's nothing,
close, if we start getting that close to the override, this is a place to look. That's,
And,
it's there.
yeah,
It's a lever.
yeah,
Could use it.
It's a lever.
exactly. Okay.
Who does the calculation of the present value? Is it you said it's a separate, it's a retirement board?
The retirement board has an actuary that does a system valuation. We use the same actuary to do a valuation for OPEB
And is that done every 3 years or something?
every year.
Every
Oh.
year? Because with the higher interest rates, we'll have a lower present value of the obligations.
Yep.
So it'll be, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
And then you asked about, the last thing you asked about was
Oh.
land acquisition. So we did include a report on all of our capital projects accounts, so you can see what we have and what's available. And all of those funds are committed, but you can see the progress being made on each of the accounts.
Good, thank you.
projects.
Thank you. I know it's hectic before you go off for a couple weeks, so thank you. Any questions? Any additional questions? Okay, so with that, any members of the public, would they, actually, do we have any minutes to approve, Dee?
We do not have any minutes to approve at
Okay.
this time,
Yep.
and I will let you know that I do not believe that our meeting last week was recorded. So my plan B is to come up with a document that has some information associated with a minutes document that has some information that I've generated based on my notes. And what I'd like to do is send it to Anthony so that he can distribute it to everyone. So that if you have additional remarks you think are relevant for the meeting on the 19th, that you would jot those down, return it back to Anthony, let him know your comments, and then he can forward it to me.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Thank you. Yep.
I'll just add it. I also took notes. I thought it was being recorded, so they're not the best notes, but maybe if you send it to me first, I could add what I recorded and then send it to Anthony.
Well, no, I'm going to send it to everybody.
I know, but I'm saying we may get like
You may.
75% of the way there between the two of us.
That's wishful thinking. All right.
He's
I'll
offering.
do that. I'll do that.
Any volunteer?
Exactly.
Okay, great.
All right, good. So with that, any public comment?
And I can send that to you because it's not a quorum.
I do not hear anybody raising their hands. Do we have correspondence, Anthony?
We have not.
We have no correspondence. We will not be, well, actually,
Then what was circulated in email regarding the 40B that came across.
Okay.
To the town
Do
meeting.
we want to discuss that? Or it seems way too early to discuss. Okay. And then I had two major follow-up items. The schools are going to send the Excel spreadsheets from their table to Anthony. Anthony, you're going to turn around and send those Excel spreadsheets, your Excel spreadsheet, to at least Lois and Lindsay and anybody else around the table that would like them. Okay? All right. We are now going to adjourn the Finance Committee portion of this meeting. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, now we're gonna call to order the guidelines subcommittee. And since our guidelines chair is remote and our vice chair is not here, I guess I'll end up chairing this, but once I open this and turn it around, I'm gonna quickly turn it for Lois to lead the discussion. I think that's okay. So can I get a roll call? Again, I hate,
Yeah, sure. Hang on a minute. Roll call. Dee Ortner, present. Peggy Briggs,
Present.
Eric
Present.
Parashar,
present.
Don,
Present.
John,
Present.
Carlin,
Present online.
Lois,
Present.
Chris Reynolds,
Present.
Lindsay. Did Lindsay ever show up?
No, she has a business
Okay.
meeting, but
She has a business commitment. She may be able to join us.
Okay.
we do have a quorum, right? That's
We have
9.
a quorum.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's
did you,
get started.
you haven't called Quasi yet,
Quasi.
have you?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Present.
Here he
Okay,
is.
Online.
good. We've got 10. All right, so as I said, I will formally chair it, but let me turn over item number 2. Discussion of the fiscal year 25 budget guidelines. Lois, do you want to provide the committee kind of with an update and a proposal, given what we've just heard over the last couple hours?
Yeah. When we do this, when we've done this in past years, we've had some information available for the town. And Anthony can speak to this. He's been in communication with me and with Parashar over the last couple of days for a lot of understandable reasons, including turnover and schedules and confusion with documents not necessarily residing where they were supposed to. We really don't have the information that we usually have when we start to build the preliminary guidelines. We filled in a little bit of one gap tonight, which is we did get some estimates, initial estimates of revenue, but I don't think which helps us figure out what the levy limit is that we're working against. But I don't know that we've been able to incorporate those into a model that we can use. So what we have been discussing is managing this situation by having a conversation about what we've heard, giving some general guidance to the budgeting entities about what that we hope they will use in further developing their budgets, but not voting on a formal preliminary guideline tonight. And it may well be that we go directly to a final guideline. And I know Parashar had some conversations with at least one member of the select board. They're comfortable with our doing that. I would be more comfortable with our doing that than with our making a specific recommendation without all the data that we have historically had to make the recommendation. I think it's important that our process be transparent and thorough, and that we don't appear to be arbitrary in the way we're setting the figures. So that would be my recommendation. And Parashar, if anything you've heard tonight has changed your mind about that approach, please chime in.
No, I think nothing's changed my mind. I think we have more information tonight than actually I was anticipating. We were anticipating yesterday.
Yeah,
So
the big
I
deal is
think,
the revenue.
And Anthony for that. And as Lois said, we still don't have a real solid sense of what the excess levy capacity is, et cetera, nor the revenue estimate. And then I would also remind folks, we got good information from the school, but that's also incomplete, right? They were not able to project for legal reasons their salary increases that they would project for the teachers, because if they were to do that, that might influence the negotiations, et cetera. But what they did give us are some guidelines. And I think what we can do to help inform the finance committee is take those spreadsheets, take that guidance, and develop a little bit of a range of, if the increases are X for the school, for the teachers, to Y, here's kind of what the range looks like. We'll have a better sense of what the excess levy capacity guidelines, money available, hopefully over the next couple of weeks, and then come back and issue a final guideline in late November, after hearing again November 16th. That was the thought process that we had. And so we want to just get a temperature of the rest of the finance committee to see your thoughts. And again, just to remind folks, and what Lois said is, given what we've heard, clearly, if there's some guidance or some sense, I wouldn't even call it guidance, but some sense, I can put up the guideline metrics, and folks feel comfortable saying, geez, coming in somewhere around this range or that range, again, not a formal guideline, but as they sharpen their pencils, understand kind of, what numbers might be reasonable. We can go that far if folks are willing, or we can not do that. So I'm looking around, actually, Lois, you're the chair, and I guess Chris has something to say, and
Yeah,
then see what others have to say.
Yeah, I agree with Lois's comments. I think, having been through it, you need all the pieces to
Yeah,
really see what's
absolutely.
happened on the page. So I would be leery of giving them something when we, it's sort of like halfway, we know we can't, because they'll use it, and then what if they come in hot, it just, to me, I feel like it might be
So
misleading.
don't even give them the guideline metrics.
Yeah, I would
or anything.
explain to
That's
them.
fine. Yeah.
I would communicate to them, this is where we are, and this is when we think you're going to get information from us. I would explain, we're not going to have a prelim guideline and so forth, whatever the process
fair
is,
enough.
but
Yep.
I'm okay until we have the right.
Okay.
My real question is, if we don't have the information now, or we don't have the model, whatever it is we're missing, are we going to have it? I mean, are we comfortable that we're going to get there? Because I want to make sure we're going to get there.
Yeah, I mean, we have a meeting scheduled, I think November 27th for the final guideline recommendation. Don't quote me on that exact date until I pull it
And I
up.
think we have a meeting before that where we could have a further
Absolutely. We have a
discussion if we
meeting on the
needed.
16th to hear the second time around. I
Right.
think by then, well, the 14th is a capital forum. The 16th is operating. And so I think what Lois and I talked about, and this is why getting the spreadsheets are important, right? So between now and the 14th, and hopefully sooner on the now part, we can at least put together the combined view. We can have a little bit of a if this or if that on the teacher. So again, we within a finance committee start thinking about what this looks like. So we don't come in on the 16th totally cold again, right? The 16th, hopefully by then, this is where we're looking to Anthony. Hopefully we have all those pieces, including some sense of what the excess levy capacity is, what the available funding is for guidelines.
Yeah.
If we can do that then we can vote on the preliminary, on the final guidelines, just like we said, the
Yeah.
following week, right?
Yeah.
That we will have had
And
absorb it.
Do they
and
have
there's
them
also this, there's another missing piece that is one of the reasons I'm not comfortable trying to set a preliminary guideline tonight. And that is, in the past, we've been able to, as we've looked at the top-down analysis we did earlier in the process when we set our metrics, and then incorporate the bottom-up information that we get from the budgeting entities, we were able to play with some assumptions, make some assumptions about what we might set as a guideline, and then we had the tools we needed to see what the impact was potentially on the taxpayers. If a 3.3 increase in guideline spending would mean a 3.7, I'm pulling these numbers out, but they're in the ballpark, a 3.7 increase in the property tax rate. We don't have that. And it's more complicated this year because of the abatement process that the select board approved for all of us. But we don't have the ability to understand what the numbers we might be recommending, what the impact of those recommendations will be on the taxpayer. And in that circumstance, I'd rather not make a firm recommendation. I'd rather see if we can develop more of that information and get to a point where we're making a recommendation with a higher degree of confidence about its implications. And Carlin has her hand up, so.
Well, yeah, Carlin, go ahead, and then we have Don in the room.
Hi,
Okay.
if I remember correctly, at our last meeting, we deferred the decision on whether to have one guideline or 3 guidelines. Are we going to be looking at how did we leave that, and how are we going to proceed forward?
That decision was, that discussion was in the context of whether we were going to have an omnibus single warrant article, whether there was going to be a change in how the budgets are brought to town meeting and what the implications of that change would be for our guidelines process. That's in stasis right now. The select board hasn't acted on it. Commitments, we have to get things done based on working back from the scheduled date of town meeting, the date the warrant has to be finalized. We have to assume that we are going ahead with our normal procedure when we get to the final guidelines of an overall final guideline and guidelines for the budgeting entities. If there's a decision made on combining the process between now and then, we can talk about it. But I really feel we just need to proceed with our normal process. We were told not to make a specific recommendation about that last week, as I recall, that the select board wasn't ready to take it up, and that decision is with the select board. So that's the only answer I've got, Carla.
Don?
So Lois, I wanted to make sure I heard your points correctly, but it sounds like as if you're saying there are 3 missing pieces of information, and I have thoughts on each of them. One would be the overall revenue projection, 2 is the tax impact of the guideline, and 3 would be the abatement impact. Is that correct? Did I hear you correctly?
And the fourth missing piece, which we may not have, is the impact on the school budget of the collective bargaining process.
Okay.
But that actually is something that we were not focused on going into this meeting. Yeah, yes, you have it correct. Those are the things that we identified as missing parts of the puzzle that in past years we have always had when we sat down to set the preliminary guidelines.
All right. So first off, I think we can look at that and say, what can we have before November 27th and what can't we? And then we'll figure out how to deal with those that we can't. But on the revenue side, tonight, Carrie reported that it looks as if receipts will be about 2.457 million over higher than the previous year, or 2.4% increase in revenue over 24, according to my notes here. And so that's some baseline data. Now, that may not be something we can firm up any further than that, but that gives us a point at which we know without it, that's it, we're using the 2.5% levy limit increase plus a 2% increase in local receipts. That would get us about 2.457 million increase in revenue.
Well, to be very clear, and this is where I had difficulty grasping, it's not an increase in revenue. That's the increase in the guideline amount.
Correct.
Okay.
Which I think is applicable
Just-
to the guidelines.
It is, but there's additional revenue that doesn't go towards guideline spending. Just to be
I'm only
technical.
referring to a guidelines discussion.
Yeah, just to be technical. now.
So I don't know
That's
that
where I got confused.
that there is more information that's needed than that for the guidelines. Secondly, the tax impact of guidelines then would be the tax increase that results from a guideline number that's higher than that amount. And we can, so that would be something that we can ask the assessors to supply to us, using some rule of thumb as we got from the schools about the union contract. For, if they said every 1% of CPI is 0.6 of a point on the budget. So that would be point two, the tax impact. We can request just above the levy limit. What is the impact on a unit basis? Third, the abatement impact. I think that, again, we won't know, but I think that we should assume as a committee, we can assume that there is no net impact, that the process of the abatements reallocates the tax load so that it totals the same amount as previously. Some homeowners will have a higher tax increase and some will have a lower, maybe even a decrease, but that's the net to the town will be neutral. And then the fourth point, the school union contract, I think we certainly won't know that until June, and I suggest that, again, using the guideline purpose of a sustainable growth rate within the town, we set the guideline where we think that spend can be, and we do a kind of sensitivity analysis to say if the contract amount ends up like Ford Motor is talking about a 30% increase now. I'm not suggesting anything like that'll happen here, but we can certainly use some sensitivity analysis to see what impact the contract could possibly have. But they won't know that until next summer. So there's no way to know that.
We're going to have to make certain assumptions in this process, but we make those assumptions. We have historically made those assumptions with support from the town finance department, checking the numbers, feeding them into the models, making sure that our calculations, even though that they have to include some uncertainty, are really supported by the figures we're able to get. And the assumptions we make are made clear. I don't think we're in that place right now. And I'm hopeful, and Anthony may have something to say about this. I'm hopeful that we will be in a much better place, that the town will be in a position to support us in that way within a couple of weeks. But I don't think we're there now. And I think this process, we've done the work that we can, and we've compiled the information that we can. In my mind, the next step requires an involvement on the level of the town finance department that, for perfectly explicable and understandable reasons, we don't have in this moment. So I am sensitive to the fact that in the past, the townspeople have sometimes said the finance committee pulled a number, just made up a number. Well, we didn't make up a number in past years. We put a lot of work into making sure that number had basis in reality and basis in our detailed understanding of the issues like the levy capacity, external inflationary factors, identified specific needs from the budgeting entities. And I am optimistic that we will be in that position again, but I don't think we're in that position tonight. So that's the reason that.
Don, I agree with Lois, right? I mean, at a minimum, we would have had a spreadsheet showing the 3 budget entities, their guideline amount, et cetera. We got all those numbers last night. And then and we can, yes, Carrie gave us a number of 2.457. But if that increases by 300,000, in 2 weeks, I think it's just unfair both to us and the budgeting entities not to take that into account and try to develop preliminary numbers. We're not, that's why we just said, you know what? We got these last night from both the school and the town. We're not in a position to put together the spreadsheet and have a conversation if the numbers are 80% there when they should be 90% there. And frankly,
Parashar, we
don't
got
even
the
know
revenue numbers this afternoon.
we're missing the big school number too. Right. And this is why, again, to socialize this, we will put together a little model. We'll circulate it to everybody. You could start playing with it to socialize it, but we won't actually make a vote on preliminary guidelines, but at least we'll start wrapping our minds around what it could look like.
Just for historical purposes, I mean, we often are in this position in terms of just getting the data before we meet. But typically we have the top-down information.
Right.
So we have a sense of where we think we are on CPI and so forth. But we also have a model that we can play with that says, okay, if it's this number and we add $1 million to offset property tax, what does that do? And that tells us, oh, wait a minute, we are way out of the ballpark or we're in, right? And we also have some sense from having had the conversation with the folks as to where they are, but we're never that tight.
No.
So it's not that we need perfect information, but I think without having that model to play with, I don't know how I do it. So that, to me, that's the thing that really inhibits us.
And actually on a related note, but unrelated, just a question for Carrie. If I remember last year when we went through just normal exercises, there was like a 7 or 8% increase in property taxes, right, for this fiscal year, about half of which was a result of the borrowing from the middle school. And if I remember correctly, we're going to borrow roughly the other half this year, and that will result in roughly a 4% increase. Is my memory correct?
Yeah, that's about right.
Right. So where I'm getting at is, again, we should wrap our minds around, we already have a 4% increase coming if we do nothing. Right. And if it's zero budget increase across all 3 entities. On top of that, then we need the model to say, well, wait a minute, at 4% guideline increase, this is whether it's a rule of thumb or not. Even if it's a rule of thumb, if the 2.45 is going to be 2.9 or 2.1, then it goes backwards. I doubt it'll go backwards, but I just don't feel it'd be a productive conversation.
Do you feel that we'll have the data we need prior to the November 27th?
I'm hoping we can have something by November 16th so that they'll come in second round. Right. And then we can, again, sit there and fool around with some numbers, and we don't set a preliminary, but on the 27th, hopefully that conversation on the 16th with the model and with those numbers, we can start getting a sense of where we all think, and then come back for a meeting on the 27th to actually set the final guidelines. Because remember, the 16th is before Thanksgiving. Sure, we could set preliminary guidelines, but let's get real. I mean, how much time is everybody gonna have between the 16th to consider that and then the 27th? What will have really changed? Not much will have changed. Sorry?
Curious when Thanksgiving was.
So Anthony,
Um,
you're reasonably, oh, I'm sorry. Lois?
Dee, I just wanted Dee to reflect in the minutes that Lindsay has joined the meeting. I see her on the screen. Okay,
did-
good.
That was-
Thank you.
Good.
Anthony, what's your sense? By the 16th, we'll have that model?
Yeah, that's the goal.
Perfect. There's your answer.
That's the goal, or
Is that
you
a
know
yes
where the
or
model
no?
is. and
I
we're
heard,
gonna
I heard
find
that
it,
as a
or-
yes.
We have the model. Yeah, we have the model.
I know, we have the model, okay.
We have the model.
It
Okay.
just has to be updated with more current numbers. Is that right?
It does. I think the other thing I feel compelled to mention is the capital planning process has been excelled by 6 to 8 weeks. We typically finalize our capital plan for December 31st. And in addition to all of this, we've moved that and added to that process. And so there's trying to figure out what we do when is a bit of a challenge. But as I mentioned earlier, the classification hearing is November 20th. So we have to have all of that finalized, and we'll know what the impact, what we're projecting the impact to the overlay is for 24.
Okay.
So.
And we appreciate the acceleration of the capital plan. Hopefully, now I understand that. We do because we've been pushing for one conversation, but hopefully it's the rat and the snake. In other words, hopefully it's the first year, and once these capital plans and the process is set, hopefully it's smoother in future years. But I think it'll help. I know the committee's expressed a desire to see all this in one place as we're thinking about it. So I think it'll be very helpful. Any other comments or thoughts? I don't, before, I mean, do folks agree or disagree? I mean, if you disagree, we need to speak up now. Because there's no turning the clock back.
I hate to mention the unmentionable, but do we need another meeting in November?
What would be the purpose of the meeting?
To see the model the first time in a group where we're not, where we have a advertised meeting with a quorum as opposed to, playing around with it individually and have the opportunity to have the town staff.
So let me clarify what I meant by the model.
Okay.
Okay, because that might help. So in the past, we've had a little spreadsheet that says guideline numbers for the entities. Here's what they're asking. Here's our little metric. And then we fool around with what we think 3%, 3 million. And then Steve and Gail, oh, that's a separate spreadsheet, right? They enter that data in and that generates a tax impact. What I was talking about circulating to the committee is the 5-year cost estimate with some lever on the teachers. You can kind of see what that impact would be on guideline spending, whether it's 8% or 2%, whatever. You can start thinking a little bit about that individually, but we would not be circulating the town model because that's a relatively complex model and I'd rather not mess with that. So that we would come back on the 16th. We would hopefully have individually sort of looked at our little model saying, hey, back in October 26th, the total guideline spending increase was, making this up, 12% between the town and the school, right? And what do I feel comfortable with given our metrics? People start thinking about that. Then we get together on the November 16th. We then do what Chris talked about we've done in the past.
Well, you still would have the 27th if you needed it, to Peggy's point, right?
Yes, I
So
mean, so the
We
16th,
could-
we would
we
start
could meet on
socializing.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
we
then
still
on the
have that.
27th, we actually have the 27th because we have to actually vote.
Yeah,
Remember, we didn't feel comfortable on the 16th
yeah.
after hearing all that to make a final
So we
guideline
have another
recommendation.
day.
So the 27th is already on our calendar, and I think Anthony, once he does 20 other things, is gonna have Lori send out a meeting request for us, both for the 14th and the 16th, and make sure those are on our calendars,
Right.
right?
And then, well, why not on the 27th as well?
That wasn't on my.
I'm sorry, the 27th should be on people's calendars. Well, it will be. Those are new.
Yeah, I put it.
The 14th and the 27th are new,
14th, 16th and 27th.
right?
Okay.
The 16th was already there, but the 14th and 27th are new.
Okay.
Okay? Does that help, Peggy? Clarify what we were thinking of circulating beforehand so you can fool around with it a little bit? Any other questions, comments, thoughts? By silence, I'm gonna, Lois, what do you take silence to mean as the chair of the guidelines committee?
It's hard to interpret even when you're in the room and I'm not in the room. So I guess this is the last call. Does anyone, if anyone has any objections to this schedule, can you speak up? Or do we want to just take a sense of the committee? I don't know if we need to go around the room. I'm not seeing people rushing to make comments.
They are not.
I think we have.
No, I think we're good here. So
Okay.
I guess the question is, have you, Lois and Lindsay, have you said everything you wanted to convey tonight?
I have nothing more to say. Lindsay unfortunately missed the beginning of the conversation, so it's sort of not fair to her.
We're aligned though.
Yeah, we've been in communication. We're aligned on this.
okay,
Yes,
any,
I would just say that I feel if we meet on the 16th and come pretty close to the guidelines, I'd still like to have them draft and then finalize, which is a couple weeks later. So we don't get, it gives the budgeting entities time to understand where we're heading, understand about where we're at. So we don't want to run into the same bind that we had last year.
yeah, so I think when Lois and I have been talking over the last couple of days, the thought is on the 16th, we're gonna hear back. Those fiscal year 25 numbers that you saw today will change. I mean, Anthony and company already said, Anthony and Carrie already said that, the schools will change also, right? So we will have a better sense on the 16th, specifically for 25. You will have had some sense to get a sense of what it was looking based on today, where are they coming in? We can have the conversation and should have the conversation. What do we feel about these? Yeah, hell, if everybody's ready to say 10% guideline increase on the 16th, we can do it there and then bag the 27th meeting, right? So, but on the other hand, if folks need to wrap their minds around what those numbers are going to be after we talk, we have the discussion, we get a sense of where folks are thinking. We get back together on the 27th and we actually vote on the final guidelines on the 27th. Right? All right. So with that, hope no more questions. Otherwise, I'm going to see if members of the public have any questions or comments. I saw two members there, Alexa, and thought Sandy Smith was there, but maybe not.
What is our deadline? November?
November 28th or 29th, I think. It's X number of days before.
5 weeks before.
5 weeks. So I calculate, I think if we do the 27th, I think it gives us like literally 2 days to write the letter. So I think the deadline this year is the 29th.
Okay.
We could meet on the 29th, just joking. We're gonna skip the vote, and unless there's anything else, we're gonna have a motion to adjourn, hopefully.
Will we adjourn?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you very much.